to say that they represent, the power of nature and the power of the wild, against industrialism, whatever, that's not reading too much into it at all. Absolutely not. No, Tolkien was right there. He was aghast at what was happening to the English countryside over the course of his life and how the places that he loved as a child, the forests and the fields and all this, were getting turned into factories or roads and this and that.
Welcome, Wild Ones. I'm Josh Schlossberg, host of the Green Root Podcast, the official podcast of Eco Integrity Alliance, where we're on a quest to uncover the roots of the ecological crisis. For this week, our guest is Kollibri, terre, Sonnenblume. Kollibri is a writer, photographer, tree hugger, animal lover, and cultural dissident. They hold a BA in writing fiction and nonfiction, and their past experiences include urban bike farmer, independent media activist, and music critic. Kollibri's current writing can be found on Substack at their newsletter, Speaking for the Trees, no matter where they're from, kollibri.substack.com. Welcome to the Green Root Podcast.
Thanks, Josh. It's really a pleasure to be on here. I really appreciate your podcast. I listen to it regularly.
Well, I'm really glad that we reconnected through Substack, and we've been in touch over the years, and we met up years ago when you had visited Denver, and you're back in Colorado right now, briefly working on a farm. So that's pretty awesome. But with all the great stuff that you're doing, the piece I wanted to invite you onto the podcast to talk about, and this is a little different than what we're normally talking about at the Green Root Podcast, but you'll see, folks, how damn relevant it is. You have been writing a series of articles, which you just told me are going to be 5 articles once they're done. And they are about J.R.R. Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, and that universe, trees in Tolkien's Middle Earth. And when I saw that first article, I was like, how does he know exactly what I'm asking for? Like, I didn't even ask you for it. And you wrote that piece. And is it fair? I mean, I don't care if it's fair. I'm calling you a Tolkien scholar, but do you consider yourself a Tolkien scholar?
I'm comfortable with that. I would say I'm an amateur Tolkien scholar. Sure. Yeah.
Because the depth you went into, like if somebody said, write an article about Tolkien's trees, maybe I would reread stuff because I haven't read Lord of the Rings and some of the other books for a while, but I would have mentioned maybe 3 or 4 things and then left it at that. But you basically combed through and did this comprehensive, not biohistory basically of Middle Earth. I think Tolkien would have been happy with your articles. I will say that much, not just because of the topic and you covered it in depth, but the writing is really well done. And Tolkien, of course, was all about language. So why in the world would somebody write this article?
Yeah. For me, I've been a lifelong Tolkien fan. My dad read the books when I was a kid, and when he was reading Lord of the Rings, I remember he would come to the dinner table and read particularly dramatic sequences. He was so excited about it. And I think I read The Hobbit on my own. Then I got into the Lord of the Rings, and so this is when I was like maybe 12 years old or something. So not even a teenager yet. And so I started reading the books then, um, and I've reread them over the course of my whole life since then, and that's over 40 years now since I was 12, and I've often turned to the books if I've been in kind of a low spot in my life, and I just kind of need something comforting or whatever. But what's wild is that even though I've read The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and The Silmarillion probably 30 times each at this point or something, I still get something new out of them each time. It's amazing because his craft was just incredible. He had such a detailed vision, and he really just dove in, completely, and so there's just so much there, to mine, really, and The Hobbit is basically a children's book, and so there's a little less, there. The Silmarillion is a book he never finished that his son Christopher finished and came out after he died. And that one doesn't hold together in a narrative the same way that The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit does, but it has like the deep history in a told in a very mythological tone. It's very interesting in its own. But The Lord of the Rings is really just it's incredibly long, and but is so well crafted. And as you get to know the book more, you like start to see things where like he drops a hint here of something that's going to come later, or calls back to that, or there's just a lot of depth there. And um, for this particular series, I really wanted to focus on the fact that when it came to the ecology of Middle Earth and like down to the species of trees and everything like that, he was really paying a lot of attention. And it's all sound. It's all either based on things that trees that we see in our own lives, here, especially in the temperate north. Uh, but when he introduces fictional plants, he also has them obey the same rules, and when he has the characters walking through a forest, just the details he gives. It's like, okay, here's someone who has walked through forests and really paid attention, really, knows them. And what's really most important, I think, really loves them, and that love and that knowledge really comes through. And so if you're into, nature and into plants and into ecology, there's just really a lot there to enjoy because he just gets it right, down to, they go up higher in elevation up this hill and now it's more pines, and this other species is giving way. I mean, he really, really pays attention. And for this set of essays, I also dove into his letters because his letters have been published too. So there was a time, before he died, that any old reader could just write to Tolkien and he would write them back. Like it's just amazing to think now, right? And so he would, so all sorts of information, that doesn't come out in the books comes out there too, and then also just him writing about trees and nature and his love of it. And he was a devoted tree lover, you know, plants in general, but trees in particular. And there's a famous quotation of his. I can't remember it exactly right here now, but it's in the first essay where he says that he feels the same way about people being cruel to trees in the same way that other people feel about people being cruel to animals. So like he really that's where he's at. And my Substack is called Speaking for the Trees, no matter where they're from. I mean, I'm a tree hugger and tree lover too. And so then re-looking at his legendarium through that lens of, oh, here's a tree lover writing about trees. Wow, there's just so much there. It really so much there to appreciate.
Yeah. And yeah, I almost can't think of a topic that's more up my alley, combination of Tolkien and forests. And yeah, I loved his books. I've read several. I read the Silmarillion Unfinished Tales, a few of the other ones as well, like, that are escaping me now. Some of his like mythological retellings of other stories, and just the depth of his storytelling and his clear love of nature. And like you said, that really shines a light on his care for that. And it makes sense. He was a language nerd. So why wouldn't he be a nature nerd, a botany nerd? He wouldn't just be so specific on all the other stuff and then just go, whatever, I'll just come up with some nonsense. No, he bases it on what you're saying, a lot of reality. And I remember being young person, I don't know, 14, reading Lord of the Rings at my grandmother's porch, which sort of jutted out into the forest. And I
Oh,
remember just
wow.
being the perfect spot to read all that. So you're well familiar with the world of Tolkien, his books. When did you decide to just, I need to do a thing that I don't think anyone else has done before, focus specifically on this angle? Like what was the specific inspiration for when you're like, I'm going to do this now?
Yeah, that's a good question because I've been wanting to write a series of essays about Tolkien's works for years now. And there's a folder, on my computer with an outline of topics and that kind of thing, you know. Um, and I was always like, oh, I'll get to that someday, you know, kind of thing. Um, and there's just so much going on in the world right now when it comes to the environment, you know, and especially during this particular administration and all the attacks on public lands. I mean, there's plenty to write about, you know, certainly, and I have written about some of it, but and maybe part of me was just kind of has been kind of overwhelmed to a degree, really, by how sort of dire, you know, everything feels right now. And so I wanted to write about something that I love, you know, and I wanted that I felt could also have application to our time and our place and to the struggles that we're facing now. And so I was like, oh, look, I in this list of possible essays, I say, hey, write one about Tolkien and trees. I'm like, okay, I started to get into it. And then I was like, oh, this isn't one essay. There's no way. There's no way I can squash this all into one. It was just going to be one. And then it turned into five, and I think 17,000 words altogether. So I mean that's too long, you know, like no one's gonna, you know,
It's not
right?
too
Like
long. Definitely not too
yeah,
long, and it is in the Tolkien tradition. So,
yeah. Yeah. And you know, I also write, you know, I'll write about environmental issues, I'll write about, you know, ecological issues, specifically the effects of our industry, you know, and our technological culture on the environment. And I write about that because I think a lot of people don't understand
mhm.
or really they're not aware of the huge effects that we're having on the environment, you know, and including with, you know, and I know you know what I'm talking about here when it comes to like, oh, well, let's go to these new technologies for energy. Well, those also have an impact. Like that's also something to discuss, you know, and so that kind of writing I find gratifying, and that it's you know gratifying to like dive into a subject, research it, you know, introduce it to an audience, you know, see some good feedback and all that. And gratifying is one thing, but I was having fun when I was writing these Tolkien essays.
Mhm.
And I was like, oh, that's right. Because I've been a writer since I was like 12 or 13 too. And I'm like, oh, that's right. Like I like to write because it's fun to write.
That's right.
But I haven't been picking fun things lately, you know? So I've been satisfied, you know, or whatever, but like to actually just really enjoy it and be like, wow,
Mhm.
I'm really enjoying this. And the funnest one is the next one that comes out in May, when I wrote about the Ents. Because the Ents, of
Oh
course,
man.
wow, what a topic, you
Well,
know?
let's hold off on the Ents because I
Yeah, yeah,
definitely
we'll
want
hold
to
off on the Ents. Yeah.
because that's probably gets me more excited than anything else. I have a few other questions before we get
Hmm, hmm.
into Ents because once we get into Ents, it's going to be hard to get into any other topic. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, all that is awesome, and I think the fun you're having comes through in. So, like I said, I read the first one. I will of course be reading all of these because these are awesome, but it comes through that you're enjoying the writing, and so I'd like you to say a couple things about so fiction versus nonfiction. Most of the pieces that you're writing are in the nonfiction world. Same with what I'm doing on Substack, which really ties into organizing and stuff like that. I write essays, whatever. I write eco horror fiction separately, and I think it's cool, but it's sort of like a different muscle. And I notice even if people haven't said it, they've implied it. It's like, okay, well, that's the not serious stuff. You're just writing stories about made up stuff. Would you make a counter argument if you feel this way that no, fiction, particularly around, say, this environmental topic, has as much relevance, maybe more relevance, or at least some relevance in terms of if we're addressing these topics?
Well, I mean, absolutely. I mean, fiction and nonfiction just hit different parts of you when you read them, first of all, you know? So, you know, the nonfiction that we both write, you know, both, you know, it comes from our heads and is trying to reach other people in their heads for the most part. And of course, we both have a lot of heart about it, and some of it might hit people in their heart, but really it's intellectual, you know? But fiction, because it's storytelling, because of its immersive quality, because of its emotiveness, it really then hits at a different part of the reader, It really does maybe hits the heart first, and then other things. And so if we're gonna have a chance of, you know, turning back the bad things that are happening and helping to encourage, good and positive things, again, it's going to need to be coming from our heart. It's going to need to be coming from love. It's going to need to be coming from the emotion too. You've been talking a little bit about this lately as well. Um, uh, so fiction is it's not just that it's nice too. No, it's necessary, I would say. Yeah, it's absolutely necessary because it hits people in a different way. And it can be kind of a chore to sit down and read something, Oh, this looks interesting. Oh, this is something I should read about. This is something I should know about, blah, 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 whatever. But like a book or, poetry or something like that. I mean, especially a fiction book is what I meant. Um, it's enjoyable. It's enjoyable to get drawn in. It's enjoyable to be emotionally pulled in different ways, to the way you picture things in your head, Like fiction really causes you to pick it triggers the imagination, as well, right? In a way that nonfiction tends not to, because nonfiction's like, let me explain this thing and show this thing to you, right? But then you're reading fiction and it's like, oh, I'm going to help you picture this, but you're also just picturing this. I mean, each reader's making it up in their head, too, And I think that the value of imagination as something that we humans have and that we can use. I think that that's sorely underplayed these days. I think that I almost never hear anybody talk about it. And
Mhm.
yet, imagination is an incredibly important, essential component to making a better world or a different world or whatever. You need to be able to picture it, And this isn't all intellectual. This is emotional. This comes from the heart. This comes from our feelings as well. And so fiction can really help inspire us, in that way and help us to build different muscles, so to speak, rather than just thinking about things all the time, you know?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'm glad you said that. That would have sucked if I teed you off on that and you're like, yeah, fiction is a waste of time. Don't even do it. I'm like, oh man, it's not what I was hoping for. But yeah, so, and you also mentioned during tough times, you turn to Lord of the Rings. And I think I've done that as well. But I think there's a difference between, personally, I'll say escapism. Not that there's anything wrong with escapism and like a solace and therapy. And so I could almost argue that delving into those worlds are all of those, and you're bringing things back from that world that can be relevant to our current situation. So the love of forest, being inspired by it. And in Lord of the Rings, it's a very much, some would say even overly black and white, but good versus evil. Like there is a fight to be had. There are forces that are dire and need bravery encouraged to be addressed. So I think that's all relevant to what's going on with the eco crisis.
No, absolutely, absolutely, and I think that um, the idea that the Lord of the Rings is very black and white, good versus evil, is I think that's people say that, but I think that they haven't read it enough times or haven't read it closely because there's very little in there that it actually is entirely good or entirely evil,
Fair. No,
especially
that's
when
a
it
good
comes
point.
down to the characters. He actually has a lot more nuance than people give him credit for, I think
No,
so.
that's a really good point. No, I mean, I was almost implying that, but I guess right. I mean, you think of not we shouldn't nerd out too much on all of it, but things like Saruman, who was once basically put simply on the side of good and then sort of turned and what turns people. And then all of that's true. There was nobody necessarily, it was just, there was a lot of on one side of things and then it shifts for different
Yeah.
reasons. So it's not like this was just born evil. It was positive, it was of the light, and then it sort of turned to the darkness, which is real life.
Yeah, because even, Sauron the Dark Lord, as Gandalf says, was not born evil,
That's right.
So even he wasn't. So nothing
Right.
was evil in the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I'm glad you made that. So looking at the pieces, so the first one is trees divine and royal. So do you want to, I'm not going to force you to go through every detail of everything. People need to read the articles, and just like Lord of the Rings, so much of the pleasure of these articles is just the writing, which is why I'm going to say the most controversial thing I've probably ever said. I've never watched the Lord of the Rings movies, and I never will.
Oh,
So
good for
that
you.
it's it's funny. Like I can talk about most topics in the world, and there'll be like some heatedness. Some when I bring that up, it's almost like people just like cannot tolerate my existence. And just like I'm sure it was an enjoyable movie, but the Lord of the Rings was like a perfect story in the perfect medium that it was supposed to be, and it doesn't need to get better than that. I'm good.
Yeah.
So sorry
Yeah.
if I lost some
Yeah.
listeners over
No.
this, you know.
I have seen the movies. I was curious. I didn't see them when they came out. I saw them years later, and you can totally do without them. Yeah.
Yeah,
You
I'm
can
not
totally do
worried.
without them. Yeah. I do not recommend the movies. Yeah.
That's fair. And for those who do like the movies, go keep enjoying the
Oh,
movies.
that's
That's
fine. I
fine.
mean, the movies brought more fans to the books,
They did.
actually.
They
And
did.
so that ended up being a good thing. There's more appreciation for the books because of the movies. Yeah.
Sure, that's we'll take that.
Mhm.
That's fine. But so yeah, your first one, and maybe basically we can just go over the first three just topics, and you can, maybe just give a brief summary or maybe one piece of information from each of the parts. But part one of Trees in Tolkien's Middle Earth is trees divine and royal. So what's that one about?
Right. So that one is interesting because um, although in other parts of the books, as I said, he talks about tree species that actually exist, that we know. In that first essay, I'm talking about trees that he made up. And so I should insert here that uh, in Tolkien's mind, Middle-earth is this planet in the past. So this wasn't like another world, another planet somewhere else. Like this is intended to be a history of this mythology of the history of this planet, so and specifically of England, and so he starts with a creation myth, he starts with a creation myth of where there's there's like a one god who then has like gods and goddesses and angels, you could call them, who live with him, and so in the very beginning they sing the universe into existence, which is pretty interesting, and it's pretty trippy too, to read it. And so they sing the universe into existence, and one of the things that they sing into existence is the physical earth itself, which interestingly is flat. And he was going to change that later in his life. He decided, but as it stands, it's flat. The earth starts out flat, and so there's no light on the earth at that point except for stars. And so in the first incarnation of the earth, the gods and goddesses go down to live there on the earth, and they make these two pillars with like lights on them, And but already some of the gods and goddesses have like turned evil, so there's a conflict between them. Evil guy, Melkor, Morgoth, comes in, knocks down these pillars. So they have to start over again. And this time, to bring light onto the planet itself, they make two trees grow. One is of gold and one is of silver. And not literally gold and silver. One has golden leaves and flowers, one has silver leaves and flowers, and somewhat like the sun and the moon. And these two trees glow. And so that's like the first sort of incarnation that like gets to be solid and stay around, for a while. And each of these trees, the glow of the tree waxes and then wanes over the course of a few hours. And they don't wax at the same time. So one of them waxes and then wanes, and then as that one's waning, the other one waxes, and so it goes. The world is a place where going back and forth between this like shimmering gold and then shimmering silver light, and then in between where they're like mingled. I mean, it's really it's very creative, you know, it's very interesting, you know. Um, and so the gods and goddesses are living in this world that's lit by this magical light, you know. So that's what the tree is divine, and the title of the essay that these are divine trees, you know. They're like Tolkien never says holy, but I mean it's like a holiness about them, you know.
Right.
So then, you know, creatures start waking up in the world, and some of them are the elves. Elves come along before men, humans come along. Elves come and live with them there, get to see these lights. You know, that's what happens. The the elves who come and live with the light of the trees, they become wiser, more beautiful, stronger than the ones who stay behind, you know. So the light of these trees is able to confer like uh wisdom, strength, you know, through their beauty. And then eventually uh the bad guy comes back and cuts down these two trees. And the whole world is plunged into darkness. And then you have the entire Silmarillion book is really based on the events that happen after that. So Tolkien starts with what I think is interesting is that it's two trees because he could have picked something else to have been the light, you know. And and as the trees die, each one gives off one final flower, one final fruit, and those get made into the sun and the moon. So we have a sun and moon myth right there. So you could do any kind of sun and moon myth that you want to, but he picked trees because that's where he's at. He's a tree lover. He wanted trees, you know. Um, and the light that comes from these trees, uh, before they're destroyed, some of this light is captured into these jewels that are created by one of the elves, right? One of these jewels then ends up, after many different events, all these wars, all this tragedy, ends up going into the heavens and becoming a star, what we call the planet Venus, you know? And so that light is still there, you know, shining on us to this day. You know, Tolkien would say there we can see like some echo, you know, of that light. Um, and then the other part of that essay, trees that are royal, is the fact that while those two trees were alive, sort of copies or images were made of them that didn't glow, but that had the same sort of shape, you know? And these turned out to be very long-lived trees that uh, were eventually they became symbols of royal houses in Middle-earth. And the health and success of these houses was tied to these trees. So as you know, if one of these houses started to mess up and not be so good or whatever, the tree would get sick, you know, that kind of thing, you know. So he was connecting, and this was also a mythical tree. We don't he describes the trees, and it's not any tree that exists. Like it's not we can't say, oh, really, that's an aspen, that's a sequoia, that's and I mean it's nothing like that. It's a mythological made up tree, you know, which you know seems ordinary, other than maybe it's like long life, and then it's you know fateful connection to the humans who live around it, and people who saw the movies, the white tree of Gondor that Aragorn plants at the end of the, you know, it's the same in the book, but it is also in the movies. So they don't touch on it as a big plot point in there. But um basically what is interesting is that you have these two trees at the beginning of creation. You have these trees made in their image, which go all the way up to the end of the Lord of the Rings, and you know, one tree from another in this lineage. And so the whole legendarium is kind of connected and held together in a way by these trees, you know, by trees in general and by these trees specifically. And as I just said, another author would have picked something else, you know, would have picked another symbol, would have picked, I don't know, a magical scroll or I don't know what. But for Tolkien, it was trees because he just really loved them. And so as a tree lover, uh, it just it's another point of connection, you know,
Right.
to the books.
Yeah. And the books take place in nature. I mean, imagine Lord of the Rings if it was just like in a city, it would it would have lost 90% of its luster. So that's really cool. And that's a lot of stuff that's, let's call this advanced Tolkien theory, so this is getting into the Silmarillion, a lot of things that people might not be aware of. So this might be a good enticement for folks to not just read your articles, of course they should, but then those books that they might not have read. So that's awesome. So the Tolkien and Trees Part Two, which I will be reading probably today, is about Mirkwood. So tell us about Mirkwood.
Right. So Mirkwood is it's mentioned in all the books, but it's a major point in The Hobbit, you know? So The Hobbit's only like 12 chapters long, and two of them take place where they're sort of trapped in Mirkwood. And with Mirkwood, the name Mirkwood actually, and you'll have to look at the article for this because I can't remember the details, but that name Mirkwood actually spelled differently is like an Old English word. Like he pulled that out of English mythology, you know. Um, and it does mean gloomy forest, you know, is what it means. And in The Hobbit, he Mirkwood plays a similar role as forests do in European fairy tales or fables, like think Hansel and Gretel and Big Bad Wolf and this kind of thing, right? So the forest is someplace that is enchanted. There's mysterious things in there. You know, in The Hobbit, it's giant spiders. It's the elves who are enchanted beings. There's an enchanted stream that if you touch the water, you immediately fall into a slumber, you know. It's all stuff that would um that's not at all out of place to people who are familiar with European fairy tales and fables. And uh, the dramatic role it plays in The Hobbit, which again is something we see in European fairy tales, is a place of test or challenge for the hero, right? So Bilbo is kind of brought along on this quest with these dwarves and kind of muddles along and doesn't really have anyway, he doesn't really contribute to the quest in any meaningful sense up until this point in the book. But when they're in the forest, he ends up becoming the hero. Like the dwarves are all captured by spiders who like, you know, sting them and wrap them up in webs and have them hanging from a tree, you know, and he rescues them, you know. Then they're captured by the wood elves and put in the dungeons, and Bilbo is able to rescue them there. And so it's it's a symbol as much as it is a forest. I mean, he doesn't get into many descriptions of the forest itself in detail in the way that he does in The Lord of the Rings, where he gets really detailed about what trees you're seeing, at what elevation, what season it is. We only have a few descriptions of like what kind of trees even are in Mirkwood. And so there it's your literary forest. This is what Mirkwood is.
Sure. And I have a ridiculous thought about Mirkwood. So folks know at the Green Root podcast, we kind of bristle at the industry government terminology of healthy versus unhealthy
Right,
forests.
right,
And I almost feel like in some ways this can be exploited by the logging industry to say, yeah, that was a decadent forest that needed thinning and proper forest management. And if they just did
right,
that, it would return it back. And so basically, what Tolkien was saying is that we need hands on forest management to get the darkness out of the forest.
right, right.
That's my only beef with Tolkien. I don't think that was something he would imply, but that's just, of course, there is the idea of the dark, dismal forest, but I don't think but he doesn't make most forests evil. This forest is evil not because of the density of the vegetation. It's because of the negative energy and the creatures that have corrupted it. And
Yeah, yeah. And it's not made clear in The Hobbit, but we later learn that the reason Mirkwood is this dark place full of these evil creatures is because Sauron himself is actually living in the forest
right.
in the south. He's just called the Necromancer in The Hobbit. And then when he wrote The Lord of the Rings, he's like, oh yeah, the Necromancer. Yeah, that's Sauron. So he kind of figured that out later. But so yeah, he's not giving the Forest Service view of
But
of the decadent forest. No.
let's not give them any ideas.
No, no, no. There's no fodder there for them at all.
Good to know. But yeah, this
Yeah.
one, I mean, I'm already starting to skim parts of it, but now I'm going to save that for later because this is awesome. So that was part two. Now you've put out part three. That was about very recently, last week, less than that, on the 17th. So Tolkien and Trees part three, the old forest. What is the old forest?
Right. So, people who have only seen the movies and not read the book will have no idea what the Old Forest is because Peter Jackson left it out. Um, and we won't get into whether that was a good choice or a bad choice. We'll just say it was a bad choice. Move on. But the Old Forest, so the Old Forest plays a particular narrative role in there, in that The Hobbit has a very it's written, it's a children's story and it reads like a children's story, you know? The Lord of the Rings is a much darker book, you know? And so Tolkien was trying to like make a transition from The Hobbit to how dark the Lord of the Rings was going to get. And so the Old Forest is like the first adventure, really, that the hobbits have when they leave the Shire to, on the quest to destroy the ring, you know? And they go into the Old Forest. And it's much different than Mirkwood right off the bat in that uh, he gives much more detailed descriptions of what kinds of trees are there, what kinds of plants besides the trees are growing there. There's at the very beginning there's a place where years ago some of the hobbits had gone in and burned a clearing in the forest. And when he describes what plants are growing in this clearing of a burnt forest, you're like, well, yeah, those are the plants you find in a burnt clearing. I mean, it's really, it's ecologically he pegs it. That's what you find, you know? And um the old forest then is like the hobbits go into it taking it very lightly. Oh, it's just this forest on the borders of our land. Oh, whatever, we can do this. And then it turns out that like, oh, actually, the old forest is a pretty serious place. And like there's been, you know, trees and other creatures who've been living there for time out of mind. Don't really like the hobbits. And so the hobbits end up like getting steered off of their path. The trees don't let them go the way they want to go. They keep steering them away. They can only, you know, and Merry and Pippin end up getting captured by this creature known as Old Man Willow, who's just this ancient willow tree that sort of casts a spell on them when they come down into the valley where he lives, and they all get drowsy, and Merry and Pippin lean up against the tree, and then the tree closes around them, you know? So like uh here they weren't expecting anything like this at all. And now like they've just started their quest. They're like 2 days in and they're already like messing up, you know? Then they get rescued by a character also not in the movie called Tom Bombadil, who's amazing. One of the possibly the strangest single character in Tolkien's Legendarium and also one of the most fascinating. And then there's some interesting parts where they're staying with Tom Bombadil and he tells them about the forest and the life of the forest. And so they then begin to look at the forest in a different way. And I think Tolkien says something about how they look at the forest as a place with its own life, in which they're the ones who are strange. They're the ones who are visitors. And it's a really interesting, he doesn't talk like that at all in The Hobbit, you know? Like he really gives the old forest its own life and respects it and shows how the hobbits, didn't fit into it and didn't take it seriously enough and, almost failed on their quest right out the bat because they didn't, And uh the main theme of that essay is just that um Tolkien's very ambiguous about what's going on in that forest because as they're going through it, the hobbits will be like, well, the trees seem to close in around them. The trees seem to open here. Tolkien keeps using the word seemed over and over and over. I'd never actually noticed that until this writing this essay. This is one of the things I discovered. I'm like, oh, this is really interesting. Like, he's not letting us know as a reader whether or not the trees actually are moving to trap the hobbits or whether it just seems like they are. And isn't that interesting? Because what I say in there is that, there's like a choice that a writer will make, in fiction to show or to tell, am I showing or am I telling? And in this case, he actually doesn't do either, you know? He just suggests and then never tells you later. You're just left to, as a reader to be like, was that in their heads? Was or not? Was that, and I think that that ambiguity is really one of Tolkien's trademarks, one of his hallmarks. You see over and over and over again in his work is this ambiguity. And I think that it's really underappreciated as part of the appeal of the books, is that he doesn't spell everything out clearly. And so things do have this mystery, and you are left to fill in so many blanks on your own and to picture everything on your own.
Yeah, and that's the hand of a master. That's how you know
Oh, yeah.
that there's a
Hmm.
master at work. And yeah, I mean, I have to say, the Old Forest and that section, that's my favorite part of Lord of the Rings.
Oh,
And
really?
yeah, Tom Bombadil is my dude. So
Oh, that's great.
like that's my dream is to live
Uh-huh.
his life. And so
Uh-huh.
if there's ever a time where it's like, oh, Josh hasn't put out the podcast for a while, Josh hasn't been doing his forest advocacy,
Uh,
it's because I went off into the old forest. I
right.
found myself the daughter of the
A
river,
river
whatever,
daughter. Yeah.
river
Hmm.
daughter, right? It was like Goldberry.
Goldberry. Hmm.
Yep. So that's what I aspire to. Yeah,
Oh,
he's
that's great.
he's my favorite. He's like he's not even caught up in the drama of
Yeah.
the rings. He's just like, I can see you with the ring on. None of this really matters, whatever. So yeah, he's almost like a Taoist or something. Yeah, he's so much. I mean, I'm sure there have been a lot of things written about him, but he was originally, as you know, one of the early just sort of like silly poems
Yeah.
of Tolkien. And
Hmm.
then I'm guessing he sort of just squeeze him in. And my theory about so that he's very mysterious, and some people listening to this are like, Josh, why are you even talking about this? Too bad it's my podcast. So basically, the idea is that he's older than old and has this mysterious origins. I almost think that's Tolkien's like wink, as in this was my first creation, like this was my first
Right.
monstery, not a monster,
Hmm.
but this was my first character that
Yeah.
I created. And so, yes, he goes back to the beginning of time, as in like his beginning of fiction. And then I think he just wanted to put him in there, and he's not directly as relevant. And I have to say, I'm glad they didn't put him in the movies because I would have had to pick it outside. It's like some people don't
Yeah.
like representations of their gods. I'd be like,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
cannot do.
Yeah.
So yeah, so
Yeah.
that's
Well,
my take on Bombadil.
yeah, no, and there's been lots of takes on Bombadil for sure, and I like that one. Um, for what it's worth, one of the things that Tolkien said in one of his letters later, and it's interesting that he would say different things at different times in his life about his character. So like
Yeah.
there's not even a canon in that sense.
Yeah.
But one thing he did say about Bombadil was that um the things like so you have the you do have the kind of the good guys and bad guys, for the most part. And even though they both have nuance and mix, but what he wanted to say was that both the evil and the good were looking for power. They both wanted power. I mean, the whole thing about Aragorn is I want to become king again. That's power. You know what I mean? Right? So, and that Bombadil, he had none of that. He was what represented what it's like to not crave power and to not want power and to be completely free of that desire. And I just found that when I was writing this essay in one of his letters, and I'm like, wow, that's cool. Like, so he's obviously saying something about the world and about people and about power, by having that character represent that, you know what I mean? And be an expression of
Yeah.
that and how important that is to him personally.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that all resonates with me. And that makes
Mhm.
a lot of sense. So we'll leave the old forest, and you probably don't want to tell us maybe what the next the last topic is? I don't know. Are you revealing in advance what these
Oh, sure. I think I already mentioned it somewhere on Substack. I think I did, but
okay.
part four is about the Ents and Fanghorn Forest, and then part five is about Lothlorien.
Right. And that was the other one I was going to ask you about. So maybe let's go, briefly into Lothlorien because yeah, the article's not even out yet. So tell us about Lothlorien and then we'll close things with the Ents.
Right, right. Well, Lothlorien has turned out to be like the longest of all the essays because there was just so much to say there, and with Lothlorien, the we return to like a mythical tree again because there's a tree that is the predominant tree in the forest of Lothlorien called a Malorn tree, and the Malorn tree has a shape of a beech tree, and its leaves are beech tree shaped. The leaves turn golden in the fall, and then they stay on the tree all winter long until the spring, and then they fall off when the golden flowers bloom. And so you have a forest that's golden above and then golden on the floor below with like these like silver trunks. It's quite an amazing image, you know. And it's not a beech tree because he describes the flowers and they're five petaled flowers, then bunches like cherry trees. And I did do a deep dive, being like, okay, who's everybody who's tried to figure out what the Marilyn tree is here, and what do they think? And everyone's like, yeah, no, that's not anything. Like there's a good book. Oh, I can't remember. I'm sorry, but there's a book that written by a father and son where they like try to botanize, Middle Earth. And so they go deep in on like looking at all the plants and describing the botany of it. And they're like, we don't even know what family to put this in. Like it's just a made up, it's just a made up tree, you know? And uh so Lothlorien is special because it has these special trees in it that grow nowhere else on Middle Earth. The trees were planted there by Galadriel. Um, Apparently these trees did grow in the divine land of the gods and goddesses where those two original trees were. Apparently they were found there. Galadriel did live there at one time. So anyway, she knew those trees. She's the one that planted them there. And Lothlorien is a forest that is a place that's protected. It's a haven, things are safe there, Aragorn mentions, in the books, oh, this is the first time I'll be able to sleep soundly since we left Rivendell, like I can actually just relax here, And so it's through the power of Galadriel that this forest is kept safe, She does this in part by planting this tree that she loves everywhere. She does this in part because she herself is a very powerful figure. She's just ancient at this point. Like she's at least 10,000 years old at the time of the Lord of the Rings. I mean, she's like third generation from the very first elves, right? She's like her grandfather was one of the first elves who just like woke up, somewhere, right? Who had no father or mother, right? So she's ancient beyond belief. And then she has one of the three elven rings. And so through all the confluence of all these things, she's able to keep Lothlorien as a haven where not only is it safe from its enemies, but it's also sheltered from time and from the effects of time. And so uh, there's no diseases on any of the plants there. Like nothing decays. Nothing is it is all without stain, as Tolkien says. And so that's interesting too, because what she's able to do is create a little haven here that is a divine, quote unquote, sort of holy place, like the land where the two trees were, where the gods and goddesses lived, for a short amount of time, using this power. But then when the One Ring is destroyed, that means that her ring, one of the three Elven rings, also has no power. And so at that point, it'll just fade and it'll just become normal again. And this was one of the themes that you see over and over and over and over again in Tolkien's work is things starting out beautiful and divine, and then over time becoming, mundane. And it's not the story of a fall, it's the story of a fall and a fall and a fall of like a constant. It's like like an entropy, you know? He never used that word, but it's kind of an entropy to where like the passage of time uh and decline are the same thing. And he was careful to point out in his letters that he was not uh that it was not the same as the Christian idea of the fall, because he was a devout Catholic, but he made it clear that like no, that's not, this is its own mythology here that I'm talking about. But
Yeah.
that's like sort of the fundamental tragedy in the whole Tolkien legendarium is that everything's always getting worse.
Sure. Yeah,
And
that's
that's the world we live in, is the one that's been stripped of like, this beauty and this divinity and has become mundane. I mean,
yeah.
yeah,
No, these are some deep themes and I love
yeah.
that. And yeah, again on the topic of not just black and white, good and evil, I'm recalling how I mean, spoiler alert, too bad if you
That's
haven't read it
fine.
by now. It's it's like this is what happens in Beowulf. It's like, yeah, you should have
Yeah,
read it by
yeah.
now. But basically it's there's one point in which the ring is offered to Gandalf, the good guy, and he's like, "Don't give that to me, and don't you ever offer that again, because
Right.
more or less I can't even handle that amount of power that can corrupt me." So that is that discussion of shadow and light and realizing it's in all of us. And the only other thing I would say is,
This the same with Galadriel, because Galadriel's also offered,
oh, right,
and,
that's
and
right.
it's like, oh, I see what you want to do. And for a minute she's tempted, and then she's like, yeah, no.
So that's right. That's another good example of it's not just
Mhm.
black and white. Because if she was pure good, she would just be. She's saying, "I'm pretty good. I'm good enough to resist this for right now, but don't get me hooked on that." So
Yeah.
that's yeah, real wisdom in Tolkien. The only thing I could see is once again the Forest Service using Lothlorien as their emblem of a forest without disease. We need to have the open park-like ponderosa pine forest that's evenly spaced in this fish. So yeah,
With
let's
park-like
let's
vistas. Uh-huh.
yeah, exactly. So let's hope that no Forest Service people are watching this,
Yeah.
or the logging industry, because they'll exploit that. But no, but that joking aside, that's awesome that you're going to get into that in part five. But so part four is about the Ents. So
That was the
for
funnest one.
well, yeah, I mean, how can you beat the Ents? So I guess yeah, Tom Bombadil's my. I was just talking today actually on a different episode that I would like to have Ent mind, so Ent consciousness. So I guess I'm on the fence. Would I rather be Tom Bombadil or an Ent? I'm not sure. But so
Yeah.
tell people what is an Ent?
I mean, that's a really good question. In the books, they're presented as the shepherds of the trees. So they're they're not described that clearly, actually. He's a little vague when he describes Merry and Pippin first see them, and so we see them through Merry and Pippin's eyes. And, they talk about like a beard that's like sort of twig-like ending in moss, and they do describe Treebeard, the first one they meet, is having two legs and two arms, and having almost no neck and like this like sort of elongated head, but like and it being troll-like, but then they just then goes into an entire paragraph just talking about their eyes and what it's like looking into his eyes, Um, there's been all sorts of artists over time who have done various representations of the Ents, but given how little Tolkien gives them to go by, like there's lots of different versions, for that reason. And so in the Lord of the Rings, they're the shepherds of the trees. They're there. They can walk around. They can talk to the trees. They can rouse some of the trees to actually follow them and go into battle, and they do. And um, Tolkien, it's this was one of the amazing things to learn when I was looking through his letters to find out what he thought about the Ents, was that he did not think of the Ents ahead of time. He was writing The Lord of the Rings. He gets to Merry and Pippin escaping because they've been captured by orcs. They escape into Fangorn Forest. We've been warned about Fangorn Forest until he has Merry and Pippin actually there talking to Treebeard. He hadn't thought of Ents before. He said he described a process where he felt like he was just recording it. He hadn't come up with any of it. I mean, he's like he describes this experience where he was basically channeling the Ents. I mean, where I have no idea, but that to me was fascinating to be like, wow, he didn't plan these, he didn't come up with this, he just and so I guess that the descriptions that we have, like those chapters, are some of the least rewritten chapters in the Lord of the Rings because it's basically just how it came out, you know, was the Ents, you know. Later on, he tried to come up with more of a backstory, for them, and I share that in the essay and explore that. That's uh, getting into some details that are maybe too much for here. But it is fascinating that being such a tree lover that he didn't come up with the Ents until the moment that the characters meet them. And then, I mean, it's definitely one of the best sections of the book, absolutely, and the book slows down at that point too. Like there's been all this action, like, oh, they're captured by orcs. Oh, they're getting dragged across the countryside, and Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli are chasing after them, and they're running, and like they can hear, they can see them, and like all this, everything's very action packed. They meet Treebird, and then boom, it all just kind of comes to a stop, and now Treebird's telling them stories, and they're telling him stories, and like it's just like it just I noticed on this rereading in a way I hadn't before how many times Tolkien just changes pace, and how it works. It works somehow. He's able to go, from fifth to first, and like it's still just a great ride, like and so we get to spend a lot of time with Treebeard and with the Ents, learning about the Ents and their background and what it's like in that forest. And then we get, later some great action scenes, when they attack Isengard and are, uh, you know, gnawing through stone walls and it's one of my favorite parts of Tolkien says, where he describes how it's like the action of tree roots over centuries, all just like compressed in time,
So cool.
and it's great to put it that way because then okay, now we can imagine that. Oh yeah, okay, like that's not that hard to imagine because we've all seen trees that are like pushing up foundations or sidewalks, or we've all seen that. We all know trees can split rocks, and so for him to just say it in that way, compressed in time, it's like yeah, okay, all right, I can totally picture that. I can totally picture these, you know, trees going up and just like tearing into castle walls and going in and it's to say that they represent the power of nature and the power of the wild against industrialism, whatever. That's not reading too much into it at all. Absolutely not. No, Tolkien was right there. He was right there. He he was aghast at what was happening to the English countryside over the course of his life, and how the places that he loved as a child, the forests and the fields and all this, were getting turned into factories or roads and this and that. Like he uh he used the word anarchist to describe his philosophy explicitly. He spoke out against industry and industrialism, many times, So we are free to look at the Ents as being as representing that, as representing nature and the wild getting revenge and getting to push it back and against the ugliness,
Yeah,
and it's great,
it's one of the
it's
most,
great. It's very gratifying.
yeah, rousing scenes of the army of trees just
Hmm.
tearing down the buildings. And
Hmm.
yeah, well, I think also the other piece is how it slows down, like you said. It's almost getting into that tree consciousness.
Right,
So it makes
right.
perfect sense. And
Yeah.
it also makes me
Hmm.
think of, so this concept of the green man, which is this
Right.
UK thing, European mostly, and it's basically anyone who's ever seen the image of it's a man, and it's a face, human face, but it has leafy hair, eyebrows, and beard. And
Yeah.
it's sort of a link between human and nature. There's more complexity to it and a lot of different perspectives. And lots of cultures have versions of them, but this particular one is sort of endemic to England and Ireland and Scotland. And the Ents make me think a little bit of the Green Man, that link between human and
Ah.
nature.
Hmm.
And I'm sure Tolkien was familiar with the Green Man. I mean, Green Man's a little more mysterious. I would say almost the Ents are a little more even human than the Green
Mhm.
Man because in physical presence, they look like trees, but they're pretty human consciousness,
Mhm.
it seems. But yeah, the only other thing I would think is just so the idea that the Ents are the shepherds of the trees. So the Forest Service once again is going to come in and say, "See, we are the Ents. The
Oh my
trees in the
God.
forest need shepherding. They can't grow
Oh my
without
God.
us." So maybe I'll write a counterpiece to yours how Tolkien was part of the logging industry. No, of course not. But no, I think you're absolutely right. Tolkien was on our side.
Yeah,
And that's a
for sure.
huge point that you made that he was witnessing, a time that had been what hundreds of years, centuries, millennia of at least some nature in that part of the world in which he lived in around whatever was that the 50s, 40s, or whatever. I guess he was earlier than that when he was younger, but he was seeing this major shift. So
Yeah.
that had to have influenced him.
Yeah. Well, he fought in World War One. He was in the Battle of
Okay.
the Somme, for God's sakes, right?
Okay.
So he was an adult already in,
Right.
1920 or whatever. So
Right. But yeah, I mean, industrialization, I guess, happened like late 1800s or, well, I mean, it depends on how far you want to go back. But needless to say, he was during a period of there was still some nature left and
yeah,
a lot of it was going away. And I think that's pretty evident in almost like a protest in
yeah,
the Ents. I love
yeah.
that.
Yeah, no, it definitely became that. Yeah. Yeah, because the countryside, I mean, yeah, the major industrialization, the coal mining and all that obviously happened 1700s, 1800s, but they're continuing to chew away at the countryside between the wars,
Okay.
you
Right. Good,
know?
good point. Good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's all super awesome. People definitely need to go to Kollibri's Substack and read these series of articles. Yeah, they're like nothing else, and I'm excited to read the other ones that I haven't. So I'll have that link in the show notes description. But the last question I always ask on the Green Root podcast is, what do my guests think is a root cause of the eco crisis? So you don't have to link it to Tolkien and the articles there, but I'd be curious what you think about that. What do you think is a root cause? It doesn't have to be the root cause, even just a part of the eco crisis. What do you think?
I think that the Neolithic Revolution was like a real turning point, the dawn of agriculture. I think that that was when uh that had a our relationship to the living things around us, the plants and the animals, really changed at that point, rather than being a wild creature among other wild creatures. That's when this whole domestication thing happened, and we domesticated the land, we domesticated animals, we domesticated ourselves. Through that change, there's well documented changes for the worse to our health that happened when we turned to agriculture. We've had dental issues and mouth issues since then. That bone density has gone down. I mean, all that is well documented at this point. The um, Culturally, that's really when because we are now sedentary and now there was this property thing. Now we've got like owning things, which included other people. Patriarchy came out of that. What had been, more egalitarian societies suddenly became more male dominated, and then environmentally, uh, there were disastrous effects that started to happen, after that, because now instead of tending landscapes for productivity as we would do, through burning or through pruning or through planting or whatever, now we're just like, you know, get rid of everything in this area and put in a monoculture and like let's get that water to move over here and like, and that's when all that started. But fundamental to all of that is that it was a different way of looking at nature, and ourselves, and that relationship that happened at that point. And so, as someone who does a lot of work in farming, for money, this is always interesting because it's like, okay, well, this is you know. part of the problem, this industry I'm working in. On the other hand, that's what we have right now to feed ourselves. And so I feel like this is something we have to work through. I don't believe in uh, quote trying to go back. I think that there's parts of the past that we need to bring forward, to quote Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, and that's what we need to that's what we need to do, because the fundamental relationship now that we have to nature is just incredibly problematic, and I think that's at the heart of almost everything bad that we're doing. And I do think that just to bring it back to Tolkien, I do think that he was aware of all of that on some level, and pointing to some of that on some level. And I think that you can see a critique of some of that in there, and that he is pointing towards other possibilities, and most importantly, helping us with our own imaginations, to picture something different.
Yeah, well, that was a great segue there back into Tolkien. And yeah, well, thank you for that. Thank you for everything. Thanks for your articles and your Substack. People definitely need to subscribe to that, and remind people what the URL is for your Substack, which will also be, they can click on it in the show notes.
Yeah, it's kollibri.substack.com, and that's kollibri.substack.com.
Yeah, I really appreciate how you have a real mix of stuff. You get into political stuff, and then, I mean, the fact that you have these articles, I mean, it's pretty amazing. So thanks again for everything.
Thanks for having me on, Josh. I really appreciate it.
Of course.